Without that, I'm going to move on to the last panel, and in just a very brief introduction to the moderator. Martha, I remember way back when that flying magazine came out with the interview of you and John, and talked about the big lie. And I felt like you guys were traitors. Because I was one of those guys who used to say at the end of an intro flight, well, now the most dangerous part of your day is going to be your drive back home. And I really felt that you guys were traitors. And it didn't take me long to realize how true your words were. And I have adopted them in my own personal way I conduct the training that I give and the way that I fly. Someone who can do that to me needs no other introduction. Martha King.
Thank you very much, Doug. You're very kind. I appreciate it. We're all here because we have a passion about aviation and a passion about the people that we teach. This GA Pilot Training Reform Symposium was convened because we all recognize that general aviation has problems. Based on the FAA statistics, and we saw a lot of them yesterday, student starts are down from about 210,000 in 1979 to, depending on whose numbers you look at, 72,000 or maybe 55,000 in 2009. The pilot population is down from 827,000 in 1980 to about 594,000 in 2009. GA hours flown are down 42% in that same time period. Private pilot certificates issued in 2009 were 24,500, and that gives us about a 45% completion rate, but that's only based on the dropout after people have gotten their student pilot certificate. And the industry estimates, depending on which ones you look at, are anywhere from 20% to 40% completion rate, which, as we've all been saying for these last 2 days, is really atrocious. But the thing that really gets to all of us is the GA fatalities. In 2010, there were 268 fatal accidents with 457 deaths. And again, depending on statistics, that's either flat or up 15% in the last 10 years. And per John's question, when he was doing his presentation yesterday morning, every one of us in here knows someone who's been killed in a general aviation airplane. They were either students or acquaintances, or in many cases they were good friends, and we miss them deeply, and we don't intend to let that happen and continue to happen to other people. So what we have decided we need to do is increase student starts, increase retention of the students who do start, and reduce the accident rate. And we've spent 2 days participating in discussions and giving opinions about what's causing the problems and how to fix them. And now it's time to hear from this very distinguished panel of leaders in the aviation community, and the idea is for them to give us some final insights and wisdom into how we can change the future of the general aviation industry. So many of them you've already met. To my left, Mel Cintron, Manager of General Aviation and Commercial Division with the FAA. Next to him, Pete Bunce, the President of GAMA. Then Jennifer Storm, the Director of Flight Training Initiatives for AOPA. Then Eric Radtke, President and Chief Instructor for Sporty's Academy. Next to him, David MOSER, the Director of Fleet Sales for Diamond Aircraft. And on the end, Kirby Ortega, Chief Pilot, Single Engine Piston Operations and Training for Cessna, and also the 2002 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And before we start, I want to thank them very much because they have all agreed to basically be on the hot seat. Instead of having prepared presentations that they're giving to you. They have agreed to be part of a roundtable discussion, and they don't know what questions I'm going to be asking them. I will be kind, but they don't know what's coming. And one of the things that I would like to say to all of you on the panel, generally I will start out directing a question to the individual that I think might have the first best cut at it, but all of you have a lot of opinions, a lot of passions about these topics. Please, if you have something you'd like to add or elaborate on, you know, stick a hand up, wave at me, yell if you need to get my attention, because I'd like to hear everyone's input. And then at the end of this, we will have time for some questions from the floor. Okay. The theme of our panel basically is creating a flight training system for the 21st century. How do we go about doing it? And I have picked up some themes from all the discussions we've had, and I think the first priority that we've all come up with is safety issues. And I'd like to direct the first question, Jennifer, at you, because AOPA has done a lot of the survey work that kicked off the initiatives, and that is in surveys of students who did not continue. Top reasons that have been cited are the cost or lack of value, maybe not directly cost, but lack of value, and poor quality of instruction, and time commitments are also in there, but at a lower level than those. And following up on comments that Bob Wright made yesterday morning in his introductory comments, do you think there might be significant additional reasons that did not come out and probably would not come out in that kind of a survey, such as they scared themselves on a flight lesson and they're not willing to admit it, or other reasons?
Sure, it's certainly possible. We did not submit any of the subjects to torture to find out if they were telling the truth, but we do take them at what they told us. And we did hire an independent research firm that does this kind of work all over the world, very reputable, to get to the bottom of this, because I spent a lot of time in conversations over the years arguing about what the problems were, and it was starting to get a little bogged down, and we needed to start taking some action. So we felt the best thing we could do is ask the right questions and go with the answers that we were given. And I certainly understand the point that has been made that it's certainly possible that something like safety is a latent issue that didn't come out high at the top. But we can only go with what we've seen, and that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, Eric, do you have any, probably not statistically, but any gut feeling at Sporty's Academy as far as whether people are dropping out in part because they scare themselves?
One challenge that I think all the flight instructors and operators out there can appreciate, that oftentimes when a customer or a client discontinues training, it is extremely difficult to get honest feedback, sometimes any feedback, as to why they did not continue. I think I have no reason to doubt much of the data that AOPA was able to gain from the research. That makes a lot of sense from what we have seen at Sporty's Academy, as well as what we hear from other operators. But I don't have any other specific information that we've been able to gain in terms of whether those particular instances resulted in individuals not continuing.
Okay, alrighty. Pete, let me ask you this question. Many of the panelists in the breakout groups have suggested, and I'm sorry you weren't here to hear a lot of that, because there's been some pretty lively discussion in some of the groups, suggests that the general aviation safety record is a deterrent to growing the pilot population. Do you feel that's true? And if so, how should general aviation organizations respond to that challenge?
Well, thanks, Martha. Fortunately, I've got two great staff members that have been keeping me well informed of all the great work you're all doing. So they've been sending me massive emails on your recommendations and everything, so that I didn't look stupid sitting up here. And I truly commend you on what you're doing. I want to first start with just a thought on the last questions that you posed. I think I've got a unique perspective because my wife is going through training right now in a 172. She's about 2 hours from Solo, and just watching her interface with her instructor, I think that some of the trepidation that we might find in some of our students is they know that they have to make a time commitment that keeps a proficiency level going, that they don't regress on each sortie, that the frequency is such that they can build on each one instead of having to relearn. And I know in my wife's case, as I talk to her, she's figured out that she wants to fly at least once a week minimum in this whole process to be able to really have a curve to get her to her goal, and that she doesn't have to relearn what she just forgot from the last sortie. And I think that goes into the anxiety factor. So then you take people looking at, to Martha's question, how safe we are in the industry. And as we break down looking at our accidents and where they're from, I think that we're all familiar with the NTSB study that came out on glass cockpits. And quite frankly, I really scratched my head when I saw the conclusions that the NTSB came to, that basically said glass is not necessarily safer than steam gauges are. And I sit there and intuitively go, wait a second here. You know, we're giving people situational awareness that they never ever had before. How much effort do we all have had to expend throughout our careers on just figuring out where the heck we are when the weather's bad? And now you just look down at a map and you're able to tell immediately precisely where you are, and you can have the page up or you can flip to it very quickly to tell you where the nearest airport is, and all kinds of information about it. So if you know what altitude you're flying at, you know how far you can glide, you can make a quick decision very fast. And now we have technology of simulators that can do the scenario-based training that you've all been talking about, that the military's been using for years with tremendous success. But we've got to be able to get the word out about the fact that, first of all, if a parent of a teenager or somebody in college that are looking at college is out there partying out on the road or doing extreme sports and that, you know, there's a pretty high risk rate of people, especially going skiing or out snowboarding and everything else, and you look at the injuries there. And you take our industry and you take a look at where young people are training and the capability that they have to train on equipment that they're very savvy with and very familiar with, which, looking at the age in this room, probably they're much more savvy than we are when you look at our median age and how they process information. And so I think we build confidence by being able to show parents and those potential folks that are coming into this industry how we're embracing technology to make flying safer. It's a great story to tell. And when most people you see out on a flight line these days pull out their iPad for their approaches, and pretty soon we're going to be able to pump information onto a tablet that's going to give the weather through a Bluetooth technology that we don't have to have an embedded system in the cockpit. We can look at it and potentially get traffic information when ADS-B-In is all figured out how we're going to do rulemaking on that. The way we can make flying safer for a population that knows how to use this technology and absolutely feels abandoned if they don't have it, I think will get us a lot farther.
Okay, thank you. David, let me ask you this. We've got all of these fabulous new avionics technologies in our cockpits, glass cockpits, autopilots that actually keep you on the altitude and course you're supposed to be on instead of kind of pretending to, hazard awareness tools, TAWS, ADS-B, and so on. How do you think flight training providers should change their training models in order to maximize the benefit of those technologies?
Well, first of all, I agree with Pete. I think the modern flight decks in general aviation can be a major contribution to safety. But it's dependent on knowing how to use these technologies. In fact, if you fly an airplane and you're used to flying analog gauges and you get into a G1000 cockpit or something, without the proper training, it can be a distraction, and I think can contribute to safety hazards. I think it starts with our commitment to training and understanding these technologies as CFIs. Mike Gaffney made a great case for that yesterday in his talk, and that's part of professionalism. You can't just get in and try to use these things and master them in one flight. There's some great tools out there. Rich Stoll said the airplane's not a good classroom, and I concur with that, especially for this type of technology. And there's some great tools out there to use to get ready to use them in the cockpit. With the G1000 and I suspect with Avidyne as well, you can download a simulator to your PC at no cost. There's some great books out there by King and Jeppesen, and Max Trescott has written a great book on these technologies. I think we have to deeply familiarize ourselves with the technology before we get in and use it. And then it goes on, from that type of thing to using AATDs and FTDs. But I liken it to learning Microsoft Excel. You can learn 10% of it pretty quickly, but there's so much power there, and so much that we can continue to use or continue to learn. And I think FITS and scenario-based training is a big part of that, and continually looking at ways to utilize those technologies. I guess that's it.
Okay. Kirby, let me ask kind of a follow-up question on that. What would be the benefits to the industry, or would there be benefits to the industry if industry and the FAA developed a FITS-accepted Part 61 training course for private pilots using an all-digital flight deck, in other words, a glass cockpit? Would that be a good thing, and if so, what benefits would you see out of it?
Well, that's a good question, Marcia. And right now, our entry level, or I should say our sport light airplane that we have, is the Skycatcher, and it's equipped with the G300. The G300 is an all-digital flight deck. As a matter of fact, as Bob Stangeron said, we don't build any airplanes anymore with analog cockpits. They're all digital. And with the G300, you can get an optional second display unit, which is now becomes your multifunction display. So utilizing these resources that you have, it does keep the flight, as Pete said, very, very safe. The situational awareness is higher. I'm a little bit disappointed, too, with what he mentioned as far as the NTSB findings. One, we did host the writer of that particular study. And then secondly, he actually mentioned the fact that it wasn't necessarily the glass cockpit that was making it safer, but pilots were still doing the same dumb mistakes. That is, running out of fuel, running the airplane off the runway, things of that nature. So it really didn't test how safe the glass cockpit was, because I can almost guarantee you there hasn't been hardly any fuel exhaustion incidents with our airplanes that I can recall that our aviation safety group has gone out to investigate, because you have so much enunciation for that. Additionally, you can't actually record the number of, let's say, saves that the pilot was looking at his next-gen depiction, saw the weather was looking bad, and he made that 360-degree turn to go away from it. Yeah. Just seeing who was awake. And then,
a few of them were awake.
And, those are the things that we can't record, because they didn't happen to be, a 6 o'clock news report that it became an accident. So again, I'm a little bit disappointed with the NTSB report. But going back to what we're talking about with the Skycatcher, evolution in the cockpit makes it a little bit more attractive versus round gauges that look like a clock. Not to say that they still don't have their place. I mean, if you still fly a J3 and you're going to teach your son how to do that out of your farm strip, that's just perfect. But today, when we're looking at competition with the Xboxes and things of that nature, we have to have something shiny and that's fun to do, and that's what we've done with the G300, as well as the online course that we have with the Kings.
Okay, Mel, here's a follow-up question on that. Is a FITS-based Part 61 private pilot course, basically oriented strictly glass cockpit, feasible from the FAA standpoint, and or desirable? And if it were desirable, would new regulations be required? And I know we're not allowed to do that, so.
Well, it is feasible. I think it is desirable. However, you know, we cannot overlook the legacy folks, because there's still going to be folks flying those out there. So we need to be careful that we don't induce yet another safety hazard by, you know, we talk about the AC transitioning to unfamiliar aircraft. I think in the future, the round dials and stuff are going to be those unfamiliar transitioning aircraft. So I think we do need to do a better job of the design that we're doing, and it does need to take into account, and it would be very feasible, taking into account the new glass cockpits and things like this. So yeah.
Pete, let me ask you this question. What can and should aircraft manufacturers do in the future to enhance safety, or has everything possible been done already?
Now, Martha, I think there's a lot of things that we want to work on, and I think you all touched on it earlier. You know, we had a program called Be a Pilot. It ran its course. There was a tremendous amount of money spent. AOPA and Gamma had teamed with it. All our manufacturers were part of it. And in the later stages, I remember talking with Phil Boyer at the time, and we ran a Christmas campaign. And the amount of money that we spent on the advertising, had we just picked 20 people and said, we're going to just pay for everything for you, we would have been far better off. and so you sit there and you know, from a manufacturer's perspective, you know, we looked at it and said, okay, how many people are we really taking through to their ratings, because those are the people that are going to buy airplanes eventually, and that's our seed corn. And when we couldn't really show the numbers, everybody started to get discouraged. So we said, okay, well, what other things can we do? So manufacturers are very much behind the Build-A-Plane program. So we take old aircraft that are probably never going to fly again and try to get them into high schools and get young people to touch them. Industrial arts courses, to build training programs in their physics classes, in their math classes, that's based on aviation. What better geometry lesson do you have than when you start throwing in aviation and winds and getting from point A to point B than geometry? And we've got great programs out around the country. If any of you want to, come by where we're sitting at Oshkosh at our booth and just grab a hold of the guys from Franklin, Kentucky that have learned how to mine resources from their state to help their high school aviation program. It's phenomenal. But you get these young people to touch an airplane and say, this is cool, because we not only need pilots, we need maintainers, and we need people to get into this industry. We've got high schools throughout the country. There's one called Rancho High School in Las Vegas, where they've got the aviation program at their magnet school, and you have some disadvantaged kids that are very smart. They're in there, and the city will pay 50% of their whole training course to a private pilot's license. So we, as manufacturers, are looking to figure out how we can partner with them to be able to go and help with that other 50%, because those are folks we really have confidence that are going to get to the goal line. We have military aviators. Where's the military going right now? It's into remotely piloted aircraft. The Air Force is going to do a program that gives these young men and women 38 hours of instruction to include 8 hours of solo. They've got a cross country in there, but they're not going to give them their private pilot certificate. How much will it take for us just to top them off? So we're working on that. We're also, the manufacturers are taking a look at just the chasm that we have, and I really think it's a chasm between the SLSA aircraft and where we have the first Part 23 aircraft. Two of my manufacturing companies down here on this end of the table, you know, between the Skycatcher and the DA-20, there's a pretty big economic jump that you have to make. And then if you want to go to a more advanced Part 23 category aircraft, the leap is even bigger. So right now we can put a young person into an SLSA aircraft and they got glass and things are looking good, and then all of a sudden the first aircraft they can conceivably own, they've got to go backwards. So if we can change the way we certify aircraft in Part 23 and work with Mel's colleagues on the certification side to stratify how we do it, because right now we certify to the highest common denominator, which is basically we certify to a Mustang business jet in the Part 23 category. Should we not have a stair-step approach based on performance, which makes it very easy for the SLSA manufacturers to do this much more and get that product certified to have a 4-place aircraft to be able to fly it in instrument conditions? And so we think that'll also help to make these modern aircraft more accessible and have better utility out of these other aircraft. So there's just some ideas that we're kicking around. But those of you down at Sun and Fun that went to that tour of the high school, the new campus high school that was down there, and see the tremendous aviation program, those are programs we need to mine into and really capture people that have already this built-in passion developing for aviation.
And that's a beautiful lead-in, Pete, to our next topic, which is how do we attract and keep new student pilots? And Jennifer, AOPA has done a lot of studies and a lot of work in this area. What is the feeling within the organization on the best ways, multiple, that you've come up with to attract more people to flight training?
Sure. So the first thing we wanted to do is identify the ideas that were out there that we thought would have a good impact. And we did a number of things to do that. The first thing we did was the research study. And rather than looking at this research as what's wrong with flight training, we looked at it as what would be the optimal flight training experience. And so those were the things that would really make a difference both in student recruitment and student retention. But once we have all these ideas on the table, we all have limited resources, and both human and financial. And I think the best thing is to look at it from a difficulty payoff matrix and what makes the most sense to do first. So after we identify, we have to prioritize. And one of the things we've decided to do first is develop a better dialogue with the front line, the flight training providers, and we consider that flight schools and flight instructors. And we held the Flight Training Summit last November, and we had quite a few industry folks there. And we got a lot of feedback from flight schools around the country that they couldn't afford to make the trip to the Flight Training Summit. I really wanted to participate in this process. So we made a commitment to hold regional meetings around the country. So we'll be meeting with flight training providers in 6 cities between now and AOPA Aviation Summit in September to have a better dialogue about what do they need, what's going on, what are their challenges. I think we can all agree that flight training providers out there can tell you what is good customer service. And, you know, per Arlen's conversation yesterday, what's a good instructor? A lot of them have good ideas of those things. But there's challenges that they're facing that the industry can help them address. And it may not be AOPA that addresses it. They may bring something up and we're just facilitating the conversation. And compile that information and use our connections within the industry to find the right people to do it. If it's not us, maybe it's GAMA or MBAA or NATA or EAA, and figure out what we can do to help. And with that in mind, besides the dialogue with the flight training providers at the regional meetings, we relaunched our flight school business newsletter to have a really efficient communication channel that comes out every other Tuesday. And we also realized that students are kind of lost in the process. And one of the things we can do, because we communicate so frequently with students through our flight training magazine and website, is really beef up what we offer them. And we're working on that right now as an enhancement to our flight training website that's going to offer students more progress tracking, a better picture. Mossy was talking about how his friend didn't understand where she was at in the training process and what was next. So not just where am I at, but recognition. So when you hit those milestones, it's not just about solo and the certificate, but milestones in between, and what we can do to help people feel a little bit better throughout the process and have some momentum that they can capitalize on throughout the process.
And Eric, do you have some thoughts you'd like to add on that?
We certainly have a few thoughts, but before I continue, I should make one note that if you're rechecking your program about my participation at this panel, you're not crazy. This was at first Hal Shevers from Sporties, who was supposed to be a part of this. And Hal asked me just today to pass along his deep regret that he was unable to make it. Hal had a medical procedure, and he's recovering very well. And based on the number of voicemail messages I've received in the last 24 hours, he's back to normal, just about. But Hal obviously, is deeply passionate about the mission of the Flight Training Symposium and what we've been tasked to come away with in terms of recommendation. Hal's a 50-year flight instructor this year, and to give you an idea of how important the educational aspects of what we do at Sporties is, our desks literally adjoin each other. So that makes for some interesting days. Is that the right word? I hope this isn't being recorded. What I had mentioned yesterday during the panel discussions is, I think we've, for a long time, for many years in aviation, been selling a plain vanilla ice cream cone. And, at Sporties, you may know that in addition to what we do in flight training, we also sell things. We sell a lot of things to a lot of pilots. You may have seen our catalog. If you haven't gotten those 25 in the past 12 months, let me know. Leave me your card. I'll make sure we correct that. And what we can do in terms of product development on that side of our expertise at Sporties, what's a home run for us is taking a look at what we are doing already and figuring out a new use, a new way, a new message we can wrap around a series of products and re-deliver it. And give a new push and a new message behind it. And if that takes off, that's a home run. We all go home for the day. And then we try it again the next day. That's a home run in terms of marketing. And we've taken some of that same thought over to what we're doing in the flight school and on the flight training side, and tried to get away from that plain vanilla ice cream cone. And we're able to do that by packaging exactly what we've done and had been doing for years and years and years, and breaking things down into smaller segments and smaller steps, delivering a solo course, delivering several options for introductory flight packages, for focusing on experiences and not certificates. I tend to think that certificate focus, pilot license focus is very individualized. And I think in this modern day and age, we need to speak to a broader group, the support network, if you will, of the individuals that are seeking pilot training. There needs to be buy-in from the family unit, from friends. I think that's how we're going to capture more and more, and as Julie pointed out, make that pie bigger, right? That's what we're all interested in doing. So being experience focused, taking what you're already doing, repackaging, and be creative. This flight training packages and modules and steps can be done in a Redbird flight simulator. It can be done in a Frasca flight training device. I know one of the recommendations that came from the safety group was that there is this evil side of pilot training when you may come upon an individual that you don't believe is going to succeed with a pilot certificate. But there are other things this individual can do. They can take flight training and flying lessons for the rest of their days. They can go up on an endless number of introductory flight packages, and that individual is still going to be a friend of GA, is still going to be a great ambassador for everything that we do. It's going to be an individual that's going to be a friend of the local airport, one who's not going to make complaints about the noise. And that ultimately is what we need in GA in order to grow and thrive.
Mel, you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add on, as we talk about the challenges and stuff, and I agree with my colleagues here that of how important this is, and I would actually challenge you to take it even a step further down. And we have a passion for the things we do, and we want to bring pilots in, and we want to do this. And I think, think about if you have, one of the challenges that we have is how do we reach the unreached pilot? In this issue, in this vein here that we're discussing, I say, how do we reach the unreached future pilot? Which is, if you have a son, a daughter, a grandchild, or a niece, nephew, guess what they have in their schools? They have career days. And I think, volunteering to set that initial seed to go out there and talk to them about the careers that we have and maybe open their minds to that possibility, I would strongly encourage that, because I think it starts even at that level. So.
Martha,
Yes,
can I
Pete.
just follow up on Mel's comment there? One of the other things that I think that I have not been able to figure out why we are as siloed as we are in our industry is that each of us have a tremendous event in most every community across the country throughout the year, and that's the local air show. Some of them are big, some of them are small. And my time on the International Council of Air Shows board, I've tried to sit there and tell them how great would it be if we can figure out how to fully integrate the flight schools that are there in the local community with the air show. We had the same problem on the Air Force and Navy side of integrating the recruiters with the air demonstration teams, the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels, for the Canadians, the Snowbirds, into the air show, and we started to crack that nut. But when an air show comes to town, you have all kinds of media that's on the radio and the TV talking about this event. I'm working with Craig Fuller, and we're talking about using the air show as an event to promote the airfield itself, the airport, what kind of economic opportunity it gives for the community. But for people to learn to fly, we have personalities that are in town, and I guarantee you, without any doubt or reservation, that if you go to Sean Tucker, Michael Goulian, Julie Clark, and you talk to them and say, will you come talk to a school, or will you allow us to host an open house where you'll talk about aviation, they'll be there. And the military teams, they look for venues to be able to talk about an aviation career that the flight school can then capitalize on. We just do a very poor job in this industry of trying to capture and work together on those types of events. And we can have the air show announcers throughout the program in an air show talk about, hey, if you want to learn to do this or you want to learn more, go by this booth. They're right there. And they'll do it for free. But we've got to start bringing everyone together to be able to capitalize on those opportunities.
Thank you very much, Pete. Kirby, I'd like to follow up on something that Bob talked about at lunch, and that is that with so many people, particularly young adults, having access to smartphones, what role do you think that social media should play in promoting flight training? Can it? Is it a toy? Is it really valuable? What do you think?
Frankly, it just stimulates the interest for others. And I'll give you an example. Currently, I'm working with the doctor on his CFI ticket, and I am using a syllabus, Mossy. And the person that he's teaching or practice teaching is an individual that's already soloed, but she got away from flight training, and we talked her to get back into it. So I'm sitting in the back, and I take pictures of the events. And we celebrate the event, first of all, her first flight, eventually her solo, and things of that nature. We do post it on Facebook. And what happens with that is that she gets comments from her friends about, well, that looks pretty neat. Maybe I ought to look into doing that myself. So the Facebook thing really works, or social media as a whole really works. And if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty good. But again, exercise caution in what you put on there. And other groups I've seen as well, Jetstream group, I think, in California or someplace out west that does training in the Mustang as well as the Phenom. They post questions on there, and being a DPE in the Mustang, I go ahead and try and answer some of those questions, and I quit because most of them are wrong, my answers, that is. But that's another means of utilizing social media as well. Cessna hosts a site as well, and we also publish or posted on YouTube a number of events that Cessna has done with the Skycatcher, flying it out west to the Kings, landing at a golf course, things of that nature. But we're trying to get people interested where it doesn't cost us much, but it's something that they can look at and enjoy.
Do you have any feedback, anecdotal or otherwise, on how effective that is?
Well, going back to the situation with Dr. Ben and Lori, the two that I mentioned as far as working on the CFI ticket, it's done very well. He got a son interested in flying. As a matter of fact, he soloed about 2 months ago, and we did the traditional cut the T-shirt tail and silkscreen a picture of myself and him by the airplane and had John and Martha King autograph it. So, of course, he took it to school, and they just thought that was wonderful. Mm-hmm. So it works. It works, the interest. As long as we're great ambassadors for general aviation, that's one of the ways that we can do it.
Okay. David, here's a question about Why do you think we don't keep students a lot of times after they start training, 20 to 40% dropout rate? And what can flight training organizations do to keep pilots, when they do get their certificates, keep them active so we don't lose them at that point?
Well, great question, Martha. I was part of the growth group, breakout group earlier, and we had some very lively discussions on this. You know, I'll tell you from personal experience and from experiences that that I know of from friends and colleagues or things that I hear of. In my mind, the biggest issue is one of customer service. You know, that we as flight professionals need to go back to, you know, sales 101 and customer service 101 in our treatment of our customers. Yeah, I often run into people or meet people, and they find out what I do, and they've got a story to tell me about aviation. Often, you know, they'll tell me about you know, their parents who flew, or that they took flight training and dropped out for one reason or another. And so I see them as great potential customers of ours, and we all need to be ambassadors to bring them, you know, into our community. And you know, they kind of follow a similar pattern. I think they're all looking for a professional environment in which to learn. They want their flight instructors to be there on time and have a plan. They're looking for modern equipment and good follow-up. You know, when somebody has a bad day and they question whether or not, you know, they've got what it takes to be a pilot, we need to follow up with them and let them understand that that's part of the learning curve, and bring them back and make sure that we're following up and meeting their goals and the interim objectives that we've set as part of a tailored plan. And then finally, I think, you know, they're looking for a practical reason to fly. So I think we need to do a better job of marketing ourselves, and that'll help keep them, you know, coming back, whether it's traveling on business or traveling to a vacation home. You know, whatever it might be, we need to make sure that there's a good reason for them to stay involved in aviation.
Okay. Let's talk some about cost issues. Jennifer, could you talk about the relative importance that cost showed up in the analyses on why people drop out or quit training, and address the issue of, should lowering the cost of flight training be our primary focus to grow the pilot population?
Certainly, and I think I've shared with some people that when we first announced we were going to be doing the research study to find out how to improve the flight training experience, we had a couple people ask us, well, duh, it's cost. Why would you do that? And some of us suspect we actually had an office pool going as well within AOPA, because there's disagreements within AOPA about what was wrong, so the study's been very helpful. But it did come up high in terms of impact. And the term that we use is value rather than cost. And we use that purposely to indicate that, you know, value is a lot more than price. And what it comes down to is not just what the dollar amount is, but how is the student being communicated to about value? Is a flight school sharing with a student how billing works? Is the flight school explaining how to get through flight training more efficiently? Are they saying things like, hey, you should try and fly once a week so you don't forget things between lessons. It'll take you a lot longer in the end. And, you know, maybe you should schedule 2 or 3 lessons a week because, you know, maybe there's going to be a weather issue or a sickness or something like that. So I think there's a lot that goes into that when it comes to value. And it's, you know, helping students understand what free resources are out there. I mean, every time I come to something like this with a group like this, I learn about some new program that's free, that's available to help people out. And we need to make sure that those things get shared in the flight schools, and the flight instructors really are the ones communicating directly with the students. That's why we refer to them as the front line. And I think, you know, one of the really interesting concepts that comes up a lot is, do we encourage students to observe other students' lessons? And that's something that doesn't cost a lot of money, and can we encourage schools to offer that. I mean, there's some schools that have formalized that process, and we're not necessarily suggesting that, but if there's a student who is really working very hard to afford flight training and wants to get done as quickly as possible, it's something we could offer them as an option if another student's willing to have somebody ride along. And if there's 4 seats, so if somebody can sit in the back.
Go ahead, Eric.
Just to kind of to speak to Jennifer's point, I mean, certainly the value equation is what needs to be the focus there, and I think part of that, again, is getting back to more of an experience is part of what we're selling rather than just focusing on a certificate option. And as part of that, what are you going to do with that certificate? You know, I didn't earn a driver's license so I could tell people I had a driver's license. I did it so I could drive places. And that, I think, can be a lot of it. And back to what David had just mentioned in terms of encouraging people to fly beyond, you know, adapting that view of the training initially, I think will do a lot for encouraging flying beyond, and also educating our customers on how do you rent an aircraft? What is shared ownership about? How do you buy an airplane? And what do you do beyond that? How does all this work? It's very easy for all of us involved on a day-to-day basis to take those things for granted. In addition to that, another aspect of the value proposition is making sure that we are accurate and honest with estimations. I know a lot of people are familiar with flight schools or instructors that, you know, are very good about quoting FAA minimum training times, and I think we all know that that's just not an accurate depiction. And if you're at a flight training organization and you haven't soloed yet, and your budget has already exceeded what they told you coming in the door was the quoted price, what does that do in terms of trust? It's irreparable
Everything
damage.
that we do in aviation is based on trust, because one of the things we talk about is you have to get an airplane up to an actual lethal speed in order to get it in the air. And the first time you go up with a new student, there's no way in the world they're going to be able to get it back down on the ground without you. There's a lot of trust there. Mel.
Yeah, I guess I just had a question or a comment because I think the value item is very interesting, which I shouldn't be concerned with as a regulator. But one of the things is, did you find in your study, or was it addressed at all, that maybe a deterrent is the fact that I'm going to have to pay this much to get this, and before I can actually make any money in this, you know, are we really highlighting the end benefit of, yeah, you might have to go ahead and pay your dues at the front end here, but this is going to lead you to something? Was that looked into at all?
It didn't necessarily come out in the quantitative survey, with the exception of the primary reason for flight training, that the majority of people are actually going into it for recreational purposes rather than career. But I did hear it in the focus groups because I was behind the glass, and there were some comments about it's not what it used to be, and so it's not as attractive. And so I think I know a lot of people who went to school to be an airline pilot and then maybe changed their minds and decided to do something else, or tried it and then went into another field. But I think what it really comes down to with this whole cost thing is that it's a convenient excuse. And referencing Martha's earlier question about, you know, people may not have told you that safety was an issue. It's often just like when you go to a restaurant and you have a terrible experience. When you walk out and the hostess asks you, "How was your meal?" What do you say?
Good.
It's great. So the flight schools and the flight instructors aren't getting the honest feedback, as Eric said, any feedback in some cases. And so it's something AOPA is looking at, because we work so directly with the consumers. How can we facilitate that in a way that wouldn't cause any harm? So it would be, you know, formative evaluation that can help people out, and not necessarily something that's going to cause consternation or unintended consequences. We've got to think through, when that feedback comes in, how is it being represented? What kind of criteria are we creating? And that's something we're going to talk to the schools about in the regional meetings. But a lot of flight schools say to us, you know, if you could just solve the financing thing, and trust me, we are looking into that right now, the financing issue. If you could just solve that, everything would be perfect. It's not the case. We want to solve that, and we're working on it. But oftentimes students are going to tell you it's cost because they don't really want to have a long conversation with you about the real reasons.
And that gets back to the trust issue in many cases. Go ahead, Pete.
Martha, just back to the value proposition as well. Several things that I think that we're seeing out there coming together, again, back to the technology area. When we look at sims that we now can put in a room that we don't have to raise the ceiling, or we can plug it into a 110 volt outlet and have it work at a relatively low cost, or we have a part task training device that you hold a laser point on and you can dial in turbulence and crosswinds and everything else and just teach somebody on the ground at very little cost how to coordinate their hands and feet and their eye, you start to make some great progress. Now add on to that a capability of interactive radio communications that some of our companies now are pioneering, that the military is very interested in learning about, where they can put on a headset and it's dynamic. It's not just a recording. It's responding to them and giving them instruction. And that's, I found, again, back to my wife learning, what I wanted to do the very first thing before she even got in the airplanes, I wanted to take away the anxiety of learning this new language. And I said, you are just going to do all the radio calls to the point where I don't do any of them when we fly. And she keeps telling me, she goes, that's the greatest thing you ever did for me, because now I just make the radio calls. I don't worry about it. I don't have any anxiety. So if we can get that stuff done on the ground, we really save a lot of money, and we take a lot of that anxiety away from people. And we've got this capability. Redbird and Cessna are pioneering a program down in San Marcos, Texas, where we're integrating that type of sim fly into a very short course, and it's almost, think of it as a 2-week to taxi that we use. One of our manufacturers is doing it in building an airplane, to actually taking people and reducing the cost in concentrating their training. Now that's not practical for everyone, but it's really going to be pioneering the incorporation of simulators with this new voice feedback system and flying, to be able to go and try to bring down the cost and get somebody through the program rapidly.
Mel, you've heard there's been a lot of talk about simulators. There have also been issues raised about getting more or different credit, even in the private pilot level programs, for the simulators. So here's a multiple part question. Is giving more credit if you get above an AATD, even in your area of control, is it desirable to give more credit depending on motion, visuals, communications? And if it were desirable, could it be done without new regulations?
It's kind of interesting that you asked that. Actually, what I wrote here as I was listening to this, and the sim program approvals, Redbird, Cessna, and others. This is something that, even though they took the mandate out of our thing for promotion of aviation, I think we do have a responsibility to do what is right. And I think looking at these areas of how do we make it easier for folks to come in, and not only easier, but I think if we make it easier, you folks are going to do the rest of it, which is make it safe. Okay, so I wrote that down, and I am committed to going back. I have responsibility for some of the lower end, and John Duncan in AFS 200 has the other responsibility. I commit to you, I will be meeting with John on this, and we have actually done some approvals. For example, in Alaska, the Medallion Foundation developed a tool. And we really went around and round, because we did have a lot of folks that said, well, no, you can't really teach in that doesn't do this, that doesn't do that. But in reality, when you looked at the value, the safety aspect of it, it's like, okay, so you're saying give them nothing rather than have something that you know is going to help. Yes, we're the government, we make rules, we don't make sense, but we need to start making sense. So yeah, it is feasible. I will be looking into this, and hopefully we can improve that.
I just want to make a plug for my friend Mel here. A letter just came through to the Aviation Accredited Accreditation Board International, that Mel is the permanent representative to that organization starting this week. And I think, again, we've got the right guy that can be the focus for us on being able to tackle some of this on an industry-wide basis, looking at what our aviation universities are doing, looking at what you all are trying to do across the country to be able to get these best practices promulgated and quickly get the FAA to approve them. So I'm very glad you're here, Mel.
Kirby, we've talked a lot about how to help flight instructors and how important their role is in producing safe, competent pilots that are going to stay in the system. What do you think can be done? What are the top things that you have in mind that can be done to help flight instructors succeed?
Well, I'd actually like to kind of expand on what they've been talking a little bit about in regards to why some people don't complete their training. And that may be they're laying in bed thinking, it's taken me thousands of dollars and I'm almost done. What am I going to do with it once it's complete? I don't have any airplanes to fly. If it's a rental type of training environment, more than likely the school is going to let it go. And I'll give you a good example. In Wichita, where we claim to be the air capital of the world, we've got Yingling Aviation that has a 172 that you can rent, but that's somewhat small. 182 would be better. Or you can rent Bob's Skycatcher. Or you can go to the east side of town, and if it's a new private pilot that's going to take up Mama and show her a beat up 172 of a 1965 vintage, she's not going to get in it. So realistically, people have to wonder, what am I going to do with the certificate once I get it? Is there any available airplanes out there for me to rent? And utilizing the example from Wichita, I can tell you at Cessna, we do have a flying club. And that flying club is sponsored and supported by the company. And we're going to be picking up a brand new Skycatcher. It's going to rent for $42.50 an hour wet, as well as a 206. We have 172s, 182s, and a 206. And the 206, brand new, turbocharged, G1000 equipped, rents for $110.50. Now, the point that I'm trying to make, it's not necessarily the cost of the airplane, because it's a bargain, but it's the availability. And we really don't see that too much out there in the aviation community, good available airplanes at a reasonable rate. Maybe the answer to that might be the formation of clubs. I've had the opportunity to travel around quite a bit in the Caravan doing worldwide demonstrations, about 90 different countries. And when you go to a different country, and I'll give you an example, Guatemala, they celebrate flying with a club. They can't fly every day, but they get together and talk about it. So maybe, a national club supported by Cessna, supported by Diamond, whoever it may be, is something that we should look at. That we provide a flying club in a given metropolitan area and allow the members to support that flying club very much so as what we do in Wichita.
Are you thinking, and I know this is not very well formed, but like individual local clubs or one big national club, or have you gotten that far yet?
Well, unfortunately, since Jack's no longer among us, that was the person that I was talking to about this idea. I'm going to have to wait till the next CEO comes on board and then talk to him about it, and he'll probably say, well, how long have you been with Cessna, not counting today? That's a nutty idea.
You've heard a lot of panelists stress, and Administrator Babbitt acknowledged that there's a strong linkage between FAA testing with the knowledge tests and the practical tests, a linkage to the training that industry does. In your view, and based on the comments you've heard from people and so on, what is the best way for the FAA and industry to coordinate or better coordinate regarding this linkage in order to improve the curricula that we're working with?
Well, I guess the first thing to do is acknowledge that we do have a problem, that we have had a problem, and we do acknowledge that. I think the second thing to do is to recognize the commitment that we're going to be putting forth. Part of that commitment should be recognized by the fact that Van is here from AFS 600, and he could have easily just sent someone else over here to do this, but he's here, and I think Van, hopefully you'll shake your head, yes, we acknowledge there's a problem. But so,
Sorry, Van.
So I think if we look at it as the 5 stages of death, I think we're past denial. We're definitely past anger. So I think we are at the right place at the right time now. There's suggestions that have come out of here. I know that we're committed to implementing some of those suggestions, and Van is also committed with me to do that. And not to speak for you, but I know we've discussed this, and I think that we should be held accountable. Myself personally, and in that arena, I won't speak for Van, but I think he feels the same way. But definitely, we should be held accountable to what happens from this symposium forward in our communications, both with 800, with 600, and how we move forward to correcting the issues of this disconnect, both in the communication and also in the corrections that we need to make in PTS and other issues regarding the handbooks and stuff.
Thank you very much. And now we're open to the floor for anybody that has questions, and Rick has got one over there.
Martha's initial focus on safety resonated with me because the Cirrus aircraft seems to be the aircraft that news stories get written about. It's got a parachute, person died. Does the panel have any suggestions, ideas, thoughts about the tendency for the news media to sensationalize the infrequent aviation accident compared to all the other ways you could kill yourself?
I think the dynamic with the media is interesting right now because, as Jim Campbell will tell you better than anybody else, as all their resources are shrinking, you no longer have a strict aviation reporter. Even think of Miles O'Brien down at CNN. They got rid of him, and they're all shrinking. They all get bigger portfolios. In Washington, we have a hard time with the major networks really pinning down the person that deals, Lisa Stark from ABC, because she's got just so many other things that she's got, the beat that she's got to cover now. I think it's Tom Kostelnik from one of the other networks. And so it is very easy for them to sensationalize. I mean, ultimately, look at what happened with the president's wife. You got 2 trained Air Force air crews, and they got a little tight on spacing, so they had to go and do a 360 and come back around. Is that a big deal? Who the hell cares? And yet, all of a sudden, this is just blown so out of proportion. So when we look at general aviation accidents and Corey Lytle would be a specific example that I point out where, all of a sudden, Cirrus is under a microscope for something that just was pilot error and winds in a corridor and making some bad choices up there, and all of a sudden they get stigmatized, and we aren't able to get our story out the way we want to in the format that we have information flowing to the media. So one of the things that all of our associations are working on is, one, trying to do these outreach sessions, whether it's the different events that the manufacturers have been doing or the Alliance for Aviation Across America, to be able to touch at what we call the grass tops, the local press, the local politicians, tell them about their airport, tell them about flying, tell them about the safety. I mean, just, the real story I wish they'd tell us the number of saves we've had with the parachutes or with the AmSafe seats. That's the real story. How many people do we really save out there versus how many people we've lost? And we really have to keep at this to be able to go and turn the people that understand our industry, which is really our trade press, to be able to have the tie-ins to the press that has no time to learn our industry and be able to connect them so that our stories are being able to be told.
Some of the things we've heard in the last couple of days, like address mostly the growth issue. Like Eric RADTKE talked about modular training opportunities where people can use sport or rec pilot as a stepping stone, so that it's not quite such a big leap. Some of the stuff is about safety and growth, like what Cessna's doing with their partners King and Redbird to produce an innovative program. And some of the stuff we've heard about is mostly safety related, like a better flight review. well, could Gamma, especially as things get a little bit better out there in the industry, I mean, you have resources available. The Safety Affairs and Training Committee, for example, might be able to lend its support to some of these initiatives and make them broader based. I know Mel would probably appreciate the assistance too, because that industry and FA are partnering. Do you see a role here where Gamma itself could, or as part of a bigger coalition, could address some of these issues across the board?
Well, I don't think that our cohesiveness between all the different GA associations has ever been closer than it is now. But when we try to stamp out fires up on the hill or just try to survive, and quite frankly, many of our piston manufacturers right now are in the survival mode, and so there is no excess money out there to be able to put into a program. Even if we came up with some silver bullets like the Be a Pilot program or the Son of that we wanted to have targeted. With that said, I think there's tremendous dedication by all the associations to try to figure out how best to work together, and this is just an example, but it's really going to be taking the ideas that you all come forward with, and that's why I applaud you so much. You got some great ideas that I've just seen that folks have been sending me that then we'll get a chance to mull over and then try to bring to our respective boards and try to get some interest there. You know, I mentioned what we're trying to do with the RPA pilots. You know, I just posed this to my board at my last board meeting and just said, look, we only got to give these people 3 hours of instruction and have them take a test that we know they'll be able to pass, even though it's a goofed up test. And we're going to have them flying out in the system. And what better confidence builder do we have in the general aviation community than to have our pilots that are running RPAs that are eventually going to fly in our airspace, that they are general aviation pilots too, and they're actively flying in the system in real manned airplanes. It's great. It was no-brainer. They said go do it because they saw the value in that. Talking with Ed Bolin, Rancho High School, we've got NBA convention out in Las Vegas in the fall. We're going to go make an effort with Rancho High School to figure out how we can go and help with that 50% to get these seniors that are in that aviation program to go and get their licenses. Those are the things that I think the real bang for the buck that we'll look for first.
Sometimes it's painful to affect a change for safety that's going to have an adverse effect on their membership. And that's why I'd like to put in a vote for SAFE. I'm a recent convert to this whole process. But SAFE, Mel, is an organization that, as far as I can see, is made up of people who have no vested interest organizationally. We do individually, but as an organization, unlike EAA, AOPA, ALPA, Gamma. And for that reason, I really think that SAFE is an organization that really could be that industry partner on the FITS program. Because when we rely on the the OEMs or the membership organizations, past history has suggested that the membership organizations have more of allegiance to their members and what could be perceived as a burden on their members in deference to safety, unless we can prove efficacy. So my vote is, let's really see if we can expand this SAFE initiative as the spokesman for general aviation. That's what I would like to see, because again, SAFE is made up of individuals who, as you've seen here in the last couple of days, have a real burden for safety. Just my 2 cents.
I will grant that sometimes there are some interests that are dealt with and stuff. However, let me say, the group that exists, the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, is made up of all these folks here, and it's not made up of any individual group. And you know, and initially I kind of struggled a little bit with the GAJC, but I've always supported it because it is made up of you folks. Now, if SAFE doesn't have a participation in there, maybe that's something to be looked at, and we will definitely bring that up at the joint General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. But I think, you know, I will go ahead and put a plug in for them and tell you that you are well represented within that community because the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee is co-chaired right now by Bruce Landsberg and by Tony Fazio of the FAA. And even if either one of them wanted to go ahead and impose their view, if either one of them wanted to impose their agenda, GAMA is also there, EAA is also there. There's all kinds of organizations. The insurance industry is there. So I think the better outcome would be that perhaps SAFE become an active participant in the GAJSC and have that voice.
You know, on January the 1st, 2020, ADS-B will be required on all aircraft with an electrical system, including light sport aircraft. The cost of ADS-B out, which is the minimum equipment you'll have to have, I don't know what that is. I've heard estimates it could be $20,000 to $40,000 for minimally equipped aircraft to operate in the system, and basically be required everywhere where transponders are required now. Does anybody know what the real costs will be of this equipment?
If you look at ADS-B out, actually we just got the specifications last year. Now we're dealing with a light squared issue right now that could change the entire ball game, and those of you that aren't familiar with it, you know, if we build 40,000 cell phone towers that get into our receiver spectrum and everything, this is a very interesting issue that's being fought in Washington right now with the FCC and all the general aviation groups. But with that said, cost is coming down, I think, rapidly. And I know from my OEM members down at the end of the table, they'll be able to tell you we'll have a capability to be able to put a puck. If you want the low-cost alternative, you're going to be able to put a puck on there and be able to have a way to transmit the ADS-B out. But is that all you want to do? When we have the rules established to be able to do ADS-B in, and our associations are all on the rulemaking committee there, and you can get information into the cockpit whether it's pumped on one of your screens or whether it's pumped onto your tablet, you may want more. You may want a better receiver because it's money well spent. Think about who the pioneer was for GPS in the cockpit. It wasn't the airlines, it wasn't the military, it was us. It was general aviation. And how many people fly without a GPS right now, whether it's a handheld or whether it's in the airplane? I mean, so I see, you know, if you don't want to fly in airspace, certain airspace and that, you aren't going to have one of these. But I think that we are going to see very quickly a rapid adoption of the ADS-B technology because of what it gives you. You know, do I want to spend? Do I have to spend my subscription to XM radio when I may be able to get it pumped into the cockpit for free by the FAA if I have a tablet? So you're going to be again making those value judgments. So we're working very hard. We're looking at this ADS-B mandate. Actually, in the FAA reauthorization bill, there's an acceleration of the mandate. I don't think it's going to happen on the ADS-B outside, but as you look at in, we may have a commensurate mandate of moving the in, but that won't be for all aircraft. That's just aircraft flying in certain airspace. So this community has been one to embrace technology when it makes sense. And right now, I think people look at costs and say, where is the benefit of ADS-B? And they're starting to say, well, okay, what does this mean to me? But as time progresses and costs go down, and I really think there's some great companies out there. I'll give you one in North Dakota, Apario, that's got some great solutions for not only ADS-B out, but flight data recorder technology, where it's just very, very low cost to be able to put a very, very survivable system into the airplane that you can get all kinds of data. At the end of the flight, you can recreate the entire flight, just plugging it in on your thumb drive, and you can sit down with a student and show every single thing that they did. I mean, what kind of great capability will that be available to us when we have that all propagated?
So, can you come up with a number?
I might be able to help a bit. Just to give you some perspective on that, and I agree with Pete, I think the technology is advancing and the prices are coming down and the capabilities are going up. But we've had some early adopters with ADS-B with some of our large fleet customers, and you can buy a fully capable ADS-B transceiver in and out installed on the airplane for about $12,000. You know, I was looking at the cost of upgrading my MODES transponder in my personal airplane through Garmin. It's, you know, between $1,500 and $2,000. So that's today, and that capability is there. And I think the price is just going to keep coming down and capabilities going up. So I don't think it's going to be a major imposition, and I think there's going to be a lot of value to the users.
I wanted to share some data that I just pulled from our course tracking application, which is our learning management system for the Cessna flight training system. And it speaks to the safety question and perhaps, you know, why people drop out. We have a demographic survey that goes out to everyone that purchases one of our home study kits, and the response rate to that is about 10% of registrations, you know, more or less, for folks that respond to that. But it's a blind survey that, you know, that they get an email on, so that they're not necessarily having to fill this out in front of one of our representatives. So it's, you know, for what it's worth, that's the setup for the data that I'm going to share with you. There's some interesting things that we asked, but one of the questions is, what is the major obstacle you had to overcome to start your pilot training? And we may need to get a little bit more, you know, fine-tuned with our choices, but essentially we say time, money, safety, or other. And money is 28%. Time is 20%. Safety is 7%. Others like 45%. Right, so we obviously need to work on that question. But safety is only the major objection for 7% of the respondents to our survey. So, you know, I guess my question is this, you know, to reflect on that, we're either, you know, getting really good at the message that the most dangerous part of flight training is the ride to the airport. Maybe we're really good at that and there isn't this big safety objection. But is there something that happens in flight training to affect that? Because, and again, this is a beginning customer. This is somebody who has not yet, most of the time, really started their lessons. So any thoughts on?
I can tell you anecdotally that John and I have had a couple of friends drop out of flight training right around just before, just after solo. And this is purely anecdotal, it's not statistical. And we asked them why they dropped out, and they said, I became aware that there were risks I was not being trained to manage. And if I'm not being trained to handle something that I can see as a potential risk, I don't want to be there. So anecdotally, that's some feedback. So any comments from anyone?
Do you have a follow-up to see what the answers are after they've been flying for, let's say, 20 hours?
Not yet. One of the things we talked about in the growth group, and it didn't make it as our top recommendation for this particular area of the pilot life cycle, is the student support system. And we talked about, for some people it's their spouse, and for some people it's their parents, and for some people it's both. But the idea that, how are we communicating to them about the flight training process, and what kind of information do we have? And can you imagine if we were to develop talking points for the prospective pilot on how to talk to that support system about learning to fly and address any common objections that they might have, and to really communicate their dream of really wanting to do this and why it might be worth, you know, delaying that kitchen remodel another couple years to get this done, or, you know, maybe sticking with their current car instead of getting a new one right away. So I think it's a really interesting concept of the people that are making the decision. It's not 100% theirs all the time, and let's think about communicating to those other people in their lives that they value their opinion.
I have a question. It'll be for any panelist up there who cares to answer. I want to expand on what Julie said. It may be that safety is a very, you know, low-sighted reason for why people discontinue the flying process for that very diminishing number of students entering the system. Maybe we're pre-selecting those for where it's not an issue, but as I mentioned yesterday, for every one of us, this small little group, there are 300 Americans or more that maybe aren't getting involved for a reason. And I know your survey, Jennifer, the scope of it didn't include that latent market, and you admitted it right up front. Your marketing folks told us that, and I keep thinking this latent market is the one we need to capture. And what we don't know about it is what we don't know about it. And maybe safety is an issue for them. I don't know how to handle that, because I don't know where you would go unless you did a marketing survey or something like that of really expensive and extensive, breadth to cover why we aren't reaching a bigger body of Americans. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that.
I'll start briefly, and then if anyone else wants to add anything. When we look at the phases of the pilot life cycle, the research project that we did was purposely focused on people who had been a part of the flight training experience, because we wanted to look at what are the optimal training experience attributes and how are we doing on those. And so we necessarily had to talk to people who had been in the training process. We do have plans for additional information. We're big fans of getting information before we start spending a bunch of money on things. So we do have plans to get additional information on that latent market. And we do have plans to get additional information on people who have already spent the time and the money to get a pilot certificate who then drop out of our community and stop flying. So we're interested in looking at all aspects, and we're very fortunate to have a very great supportive membership base and a very generous donor base to help push through some of the things we're trying to do, and we have plans and proposals out there to do those things right now.
Any other comments?
I'll add to that, that I think in recent years we've come a long way in terms of developing risk mitigation strategies, techniques, and that's continuing to evolve. I expect that part of what will come from this event will continue down that track, and that will include scenario-based training, etc. So that might be, that will be a new message we can deliver to that market if indeed, it is understood that these safety-related issues, are indeed a problem and are indeed a reason why many left. I think we are much better equipped right now than only a few years ago to handle that.
Any other comments? In that case, we'll close, and please join me in giving a hand to our brave panelists here.